The old farmhouse stood like a solitary sentinel against the vast, empty landscape. Weathered wood and peeling paint told stories of decades past, but it was the ancient barn that drew my attention from the moment we arrived at Grandpa Earl's property. Something about its looming silhouette against the pale summer sky made my skin prickle with unease, even before my brother Jason and I stepped inside. We'd come to spend 2 weeks at the farm while Grandpa recovered from his hip surgery. The isolation was supposed to be peaceful, a break from our hectic city lives. That first afternoon, while Grandpa napped, we decided to explore the property. The barn's massive doors groaned in protest as we pushed them open, releasing the musty scent of hay and decades of dust. The interior was dim despite the afternoon sun, with light filtering through cracks in the weathered walls. I traced my fingers over ancient farm implements hanging from rusted nails, imagining the countless hands that had wielded them over generations. Jason wandered deeper into the structure, his footsteps creating hollow echoes on the wooden floor. That's when we heard it, a faint metallic rattling from beneath our feet. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Jason shot me a questioning look. Again, the sound rose from below, the unmistakable clink of metal links sliding against each other, like someone slowly dragging a heavy chain. My brother tapped his foot against the floorboards. The hollow sound confirmed what we both suspected. There was space underneath. We scoured the area until we found it. A small trapdoor partially hidden beneath a pile of moldy hay. An ancient padlock secured it, but decades of rust had rendered it brittle. One solid strike with a nearby shovel was all it took. The hinges shrieked as we lifted the door, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that carried the unmistakable scent of damp earth and something else. Something sour and unpleasant that made my stomach clench. A narrow wooden ladder descended into darkness. Jason used his phone's flashlight to illuminate what appeared to be a dry well about 15 feet deep, its stone walls forming a perfect circle. Against my better judgment, we climbed down. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against my lungs like a physical weight. At the bottom, our lights revealed what the darkness had concealed: long, desperate scratch marks etched into the stone walls, some reaching almost to the top, as if someone had frantically tried to climb out. And there, bolted into the wall at intervals, were 4 sets of iron shackles attached to rusted chains, the source of the sounds we'd heard. But how could they have moved on their own? My pulse quickened as Jason ran his fingers over the deepest scratches. He whispered that some appeared surprisingly fresh, despite the layers of dust covering everything. A sudden cold draft brushed against my neck, raising goosebumps across my skin. I spun around, certain someone was standing behind me, but found only empty space. We questioned Grandpa about the well that evening as he sat in his recliner, staring vacantly at the muted television. His reaction was immediate and visceral. His weathered face paled, and his gnarled hands began to tremble. He muttered something about boundaries and respect before abruptly changing the subject. When I pressed further, he slammed his fist against the armrest and suggested, with an edge to his voice that I'd never heard before, that we find somewhere else to stay if we couldn't respect his privacy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bedroom window faced the barn, and I found myself staring at its dark silhouette for hours. Around 3 a.m, I noticed a faint glow emanating from inside, pulsing like a heartbeat. My rational mind suggested moonlight reflecting off something metallic, but deep down, I knew better. The next day, I visited the local diner alone, The elderly waitress grew uncomfortable when I mentioned the farm. After some persuasion, she reluctantly shared what she knew. During the Great Drought of 1887, the previous owners had captured travelers passing through, keeping them chained in the well. Their water supply was dwindling, and they believed that sacrificing outsiders would appease whatever forces controlled the rain. The prisoners were never released, even after the rains finally came. That night, the temperature in our room dropped drastically, though it was summer. The chains began to rattle more insistently, no longer just in the well, but seemingly through the walls themselves. I watched in horror as moisture seeped through the ceiling, forming words in a language I couldn't understand. My brother slept through it all, but I noticed dark bruises forming around his wrists and ankles, exactly where shackles would have been. On our final night, I awoke to find myself standing in the barn, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The trapdoor was open, and voices called from below, not in pain or anguish, but in welcome, as if they'd been expecting me. The chains rattled rhythmically, almost musically. I felt an overwhelming urge to descend the ladder one last time. I resisted, but barely. Instead, I sealed the trapdoor with every lock and chain I could find on the property. We left the next morning. Grandpa didn't seem surprised or disappointed. Years later, after Grandpa passed, the property came to us. We never returned, choosing instead to sell it sight unseen. The strange thing was, nobody would buy it. Real estate agents reported that interested parties would suddenly change their minds upon visiting. The farm remains empty to this day. Sometimes I dream of the well, of chains rattling beneath weathered floorboards. In these dreams, the scratches on the stone walls spell out my name, and I wake with the taste of stale, dusty air in my mouth and faint bruises around my wrists that fade by morning. The first time we heard it, Sarah convinced me it was just the building settling. Old structures make noise, she said, but ancient buildings don't drag furniture across hardwood floors at precisely 3:17 a.m. every single night when the apartment above ours has supposedly been vacant for nearly a decade. When we signed the lease on apartment 202, I couldn't believe our luck. Downtown location, pre-war architecture, and rent that seemed suspiciously affordable in today's market. The listing agent avoided eye contact when I asked why the price was so reasonable, something about high turnover and the owner being motivated to find stable tenants. We were too enchanted by the crown molding and original hardwood floors to press further. 3 weeks in, the noises began. It always starts the same way, a low scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy wooden desk across unfinished floorboards. My eyes snap open in the darkness, pulse immediately racing. Sarah usually sleeps through it, but I lie awake, sweat beading on my forehead as the ceiling creaks in rhythmic patterns that seem almost deliberate. Footsteps pacing in concentric circles, furniture being rearranged. Sometimes, I swear I hear muffled voices, speaking in cadences that feel just beyond comprehension. Last night, I finally confronted Mrs. Lombardi, the elderly building caretaker who lives on the ground floor. My hands trembled as I described the noises. I expected dismissal, maybe a logical explanation about pipes or the building's foundation. Instead, her weathered face paled. She admitted that apartment 302 had churned through tenants for decades. None lasted more than 2 months. They all complained about the same things: furniture rearranging itself when they weren't looking, strange voices filtering through the air vents, speaking what sounded like backwards Latin, unexplainable cold spots that moved around the apartment like sentient pockets of winter. Mrs. Lombardi's eyes darted nervously as she explained that the unit had been locked up for 8 years now, after one tenant fled in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind. The landlord tried renting it twice afterward, but gave up when both prospective tenants backed out before signing the lease. Something about a feeling of being watched, of something breathing on the back of their necks during the walkthrough. When I told Sarah about this conversation, I expected her practical mind to find some rational explanation. Instead, her usual skepticism crumbled. She confessed that she'd been hearing things too, not just at night, but throughout the day when I was at work. Whispers that seemed to follow her from room to room. The sensation of fingers brushing against the back of her neck when she sat at her desk by the vent. We made the decision together. Tonight, we would investigate apartment 302. My throat constricts as we climb the stairs, each step making the ancient wood groan beneath our weight. The hallway on the 3rd floor is identical to ours, except for the unnatural stillness. The air feels thick, resistant, as if we're moving through invisible cobwebs. The temperature has dropped at least 15 degrees compared to our floor, though it's the middle of summer and the building has no air conditioning. We approach 302, and my heart nearly stops. The door, supposedly secured with multiple deadbolts according to Mrs. Lombardi, stands slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness beckons from within. Sarah clutches my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through my sleeve. I can feel her pulse racing alongside mine as we exchange a wordless glance. I push the door open with my fingertips, and it swings inward with an ominous silence. No creaking hinges, just a perfect, unnatural quiet. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, revealing an apartment that mirrors our own in layout, but not in condition. The place should be empty, or at least covered in years of dust. Instead, it looks like someone has been living here. Everything meticulously arranged, surfaces gleaming. A dining table with 4 chairs sits perfectly centered beneath a chandelier. Bookshelves line the walls, filled with ancient-looking volumes with illegible spines. The furniture is all heavy, dark wood that looks centuries old, not decades. As we step inside, the door closes behind us without either of us touching it. Sarah's sharp intake of breath is the only sound in the oppressive silence. My mouth turns to sandpaper as I try to call out, but no words come. The flashlight flickers, then dies, plunging us into darkness. And then it begins, the scraping sound directly beneath our feet. But that's impossible. We live directly below this apartment. How can the noise be coming from beneath us now? The walls begin to vibrate with a low hum that I feel in my molars more than hear with my ears. The temperature plummets until I can see our breath crystallizing in the darkness. Something brushes against my ankle. Not a hand. Something that feels like fabric, or perhaps hair. The touch circles my feet, then begins to climb up my leg. My muscles lock in terror. In the corner of the room, the darkness shifts, coalesces. It isn't merely the absence of light. It's something tangible, something watching, something that's been waiting. Sarah tugs my arm, breaking me from my paralysis. We stumble backward toward the door, but the apartment's dimensions seem to have shifted. The exit isn't where it should be. The darkness in the corner stretches, reaching toward us with appendages of pure shadow. My watch reads 3:17 a.m., exactly when we finally locate the door. It swings open at Sarah's touch, and we tumble into the hallway. The door slams shut behind us with enough force to shake the building's foundation. We don't speak as we race down to our apartment. We don't discuss what we saw or what almost happened. We don't talk about the impossible apartment that exists in the same space as our own, or the fact that someone, something, has been living above us all along. And we certainly don't mention that, since we returned, the noises have stopped completely, or that now, every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., we hear footsteps, not from above, but outside our bedroom door. The night had teeth, sharp ones that bit through my jacket as I navigated the winding country roads, my headlights barely penetrating the thick fog that seemed to devour the landscape. My rideshare app glowed with eerie blue light in the darkness of my car, the only technology for miles around. The destination pin dropped in the middle of nowhere, a rural address 20 miles from the nearest town. The fare was triple the normal rate. Desperate people paid desperate prices after midnight. I should have declined the ride. My gut twisted with warning as my sedan's tires crunched over the gravel that gradually gave way to dirt. But money is money, and rent was due. The address led me down an unmarked road, where tree branches clawed at my windows like skeletal fingers. My GPS stuttered, then fell silent as if something had swallowed the signal. I slowed to a crawl, peering through sheets of mist, when my headlights finally captured a solitary figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the road. My throat constricted at the sight. He wasn't waiting beneath a porch light or standing near any discernible structure, just standing alone in the darkness where the address indicated, as if he'd materialized from the fog itself. Even in the dim light, I could tell something was wrong with his appearance. His suit was impeccably tailored, but in a style I'd only seen in history books. High collar, strange lapels, a waistcoat that hadn't been fashionable in a century. I considered driving away, foot hovering over the accelerator, when the app chimed, confirming my arrival. Too late to back out now. The man approached without a sound, his footsteps making no impression in the mud. My skin crawled as he opened the back door and slid onto the seat. No luggage, no phone, not even a coat despite the biting cold. The rearview mirror showed a pale face with hollow cheeks and eyes that never seemed to blink. My voice cracked as I confirmed his destination. He nodded silently, and I noticed his hands, unnaturally smooth, like wax, with fingernails that appeared to have never been cut. The temperature in the car plummeted, my breath suddenly visible in cloudy puffs. My heater was running full blast, but it couldn't combat the cold that seemed to emanate from my passenger. 10 minutes into our journey, he began to murmur. At first, I thought he was speaking to me, but his gaze never left the window, his whispers creating small fog patterns on the glass. I strained to hear, catching fragments about returning home, about mistakes that couldn't be undone, about how sorry he was, how the guilt had followed him for so long. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the leather creaking under the pressure. The roads narrowed as we drove deeper into the countryside, trees pressing closer to the car. My headlights caught glimpses of crumbling stone walls and ancient fence posts. Strange shadows darted between trees, always just at the periphery of my vision. I blinked rapidly, heart hammering against my ribs. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold, trickling down my spine in icy rivulets. My passenger fell silent as we approached a rusty iron gate. Beyond it lay the cemetery he'd requested, Oakwood Memorial, according to the weathered sign. The grounds were ancient, tombstones tilting at odd angles, like broken teeth. My mouth went dry. Nothing about this felt right. No one gets dropped off at a cemetery at 2 a.m. I cleared my throat, asking if he was sure about the destination. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror for the first time. Not just hollow, but somehow impossibly deep, as if I were looking into an abyss that stretched back through decades. He whispered that he was finally home, that they were waiting for him. My phone's screen flashed wildly before going completely dark. The engine sputtered and died, plunging us into silence broken only by my ragged breathing. I fumbled with the ignition, fingers trembling so violently I could barely grasp the key. When the engine finally roared back to life and the headlights cut through the darkness, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. A cold sensation like fingers traced the back of my neck. I whipped around, but there was no one, nothing but a small object glinting on the upholstery. A brooch, tarnished and ancient, its metal corroded by time. I reached for it with shaking fingers, turning it over to reveal an engraved family crest and a date, 1905. I threw the car into drive, tires spinning in mud as I fled, the cemetery fading into darkness behind me. At home, I researched Oakwood Memorial, finding old news articles about the Hargrove family, prominent landowners who all perished under mysterious circumstances in 1905. Their family plot was marked by an ornate iron fence and a legend of a son who vanished before the tragedy, rumored to have abandoned his family to their fate. The brooch sits on my desk as I write this, and sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers from the corner of my room. Apologies, explanations, guilt that has festered for over a century. I've stopped driving at night. I've deleted the rideshare app, but I can't escape the feeling that my passenger is still with me, that I somehow brought him home, and in doing so, invited something ancient and unresolved into my life. I've tried to return the brooch to the cemetery twice now. Both times I found myself back home with it, still in my pocket, with no memory of turning around. I fear it's no longer a question of returning an object, but of setting something free. Something that isn't ready to be released from its penance. And sometimes, in my rearview mirror, I catch a glimpse of hollow eyes watching me from the back seat.